welcome back to Ristar Game Gear. In this part we're going into Planet Sonata, and Planet Sonata is, at least for the first act, quite heavily based on the Mega Drive version, to the point where it does use the metronome gimmick, which, if you remember from the Mega Drive version, I did quite a fair bit actually, because it's quite an interesting, I guess, puzzle. It's not really overly puzzling, like there's only a few puzzle elements to it, but still, as it goes, there are a few points where you have to use your noddle a bit and think, like, how can I get the metronome past this certain section? And you do have to kind of stop and think about it sometimes, which usually not my thing. But I think the reason why this appeals to me is because it does tie in with the music, and you get that instant feedback psychologically of, right, I've got this particular step and now I can hear more instrumentation in the music. And that's something that I can bring up actually, because the music in this game, I think it does a pretty damn good job for a Game Gear game. Because it does mostly adapt pieces from the Mega Drive version. I do much prefer the Mega Drive one. Like, the Mega Drive one has this certain degree of charm to it. Like, it's got a bit more of a punch to it than the Game Gear version has. But if you're talking about 8-bit adaptations of songs from a 16-bit game, it is pretty fucking solid. I will say that if you remember me gushing over Star Humming a little bit, like the ending themes, Star Humming is a little bit of a letdown. Like, it does the job, but you know, that's one of like my favourite video game songs ever. So to hear a bit of a lesser version of it, it's not quite as impactful to me, but it's still a good take of the song. And here you hear the Planet Sonata theme, and it carries over the gimmick of each time you get the metronome to a new checkpoint, it adds a bit more to the song. There's a little bit more oomph to it each time. And yeah, so as far as music goes, it's a good soundtrack. It is held back a little bit by being overshadowed, but like, this is the sort of thing that when I posted up the long play of it, I remember seeing comments like, this is one of the best adaptations of a Mega Drive soundtrack. And I see where people are coming from, because I think of like some of the other handheld adaptations that I've been playing through recently. If you look on the channel, you see I've been doing the Game Boy Mega Man games. I did Dr. Wily's Revenge back in January, and a little while ago I did Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy. And what I will say for those games is that their musical pieces vary quite a lot in quality from game to game, because the ones I've played up to this point, I have actually recorded the footage for Mega Man 3 Game Boy, so you can expect that playthrough later down the line. But 1 and 3 are pretty faithful adaptations, but if you remember my main bitching from Mega Man 2 Game Boy, that just threw everything out. I think it was trying to make its own soundtrack, but it did a fucking horrible job. So it is really refreshing to go onto a game like Ristar Game Gear, which is a handheld adaptation of one of my favourite games and a game with one of my favourite soundtracks. And to hear that it's a pretty faithful transposition of the pieces. But yes, like with the Mega Drive version, we also see a return of the Bobbing Birds boss. I will say, when I bring up these names, for some of them I know they're the official names, like I've seen them corroborated between multiple guides, multiple wikis, wiki pages, different fan sites, stuff like that. But then things like Bobbing Birds, I only saw this on one guide on Game FAQs, so I don't know quite how accurate that is, or whether this is just like a mini boss that didn't have a name and someone just thought, it looks like Bobbing Birds, we'll use that. So this is the thing, that this game, there's really not that much information out there. There's not that much out there for the Mega Drive one, but at least I was able to find like comments from developers and project leads and stuff like that. Whereas for this one, I suppose because of how relatively obscure it is, there's like nothing. I think there was one guide on Game FAQs, maybe 2 guides, and like some Q&A thing, something like that. But It seems even pages like Sega Retro and that just sort of briefly skim past this one, because I don't know whether it's because if it was outsourced to this other Japan System House company that maybe they really don't publish much information about the games they're working on or something, but yeah, it's quite difficult to come up with things to talk about here. So most of this playthrough is going to be the good old trusty opinions, for which I have way too many on literally everything. But hey, this game I think is distinct enough from the Mega Drive one to deserve its own separate playthrough. And because most people don't bother covering the Game Gear one, and I like being a bit of an exception to the rule. Same reason why I've been going through the Game Boy Mega Man games, because they're the games that get overlooked compared to their more famous, more well-known big brothers. Well, I'm saying that, even then I do actually hear about it. The Game Boy Mega Man in conversation from time to time, whereas quite often whenever someone mentions Ristar, a lot of people don't even realise there is a Game Gear version, because the Mega Drive version's become one of these games where it's a bit of a cult hit. Like, it's got its very own dedicated fan base, like the kind of people who really want a sequel, myself included, and the people who will bring that up as like number one on their games that like most underrated games or games most deserving of sequels, or you know, them kind of lists whenever people bring it up. Like, there's those people that will have Ristar there front center, but that tends to be solely in terms of the Mega Drive one, because I never hear people talking about the Game Gear one. And when I do, it's usually, oh wait, it's a Game Gear one? But this guy is back. Planet Sonata on the whole is very much similar to the Mega Drive one. It's probably, outside of Planet Flora, probably one of the most faithful levels. Though saying that, even Planet Flora, the Mega Drive one had that like light switch gimmick in the later act, which didn't show up here. And it was kind of like 2 tutorial acts. The fact that the next level we're going to be going on to, Planet Freon, the second round of that is hugely different to the Mega Drive one. That's why I'm kind of okay with this part being fairly rehashy. Like, to the point where Freon actually has a different boss. This is, I guess, I'm not sure whether I'd say this is easier or harder. Like, he doesn't seem to be doing as much cool shit as he did in the Mega Drive one. But by the same token, this background is still disorienting as fuck, and you haven't got as much space to move when he darts in on you. But either way, Owick, I think that's how you pronounce the boss's name, like, he's down now, and the curtain has come back forward, and I do kind of like the stage show trope that some games have with the levels. Like, I don't like it being the whole game explicitly. Like, it works sometimes. Like, I know one of the Mario classic games, Mario 3 if I recall correctly, I'm not as well versed in Mario as I am with other games, but like, yeah, I remember that being a stage show and they had the odd subtle aesthetics to it, whereas this is just this level where they use it, and I kind of like to imagine there was like a crowd of people watching Ristar taking on Owick just then. I don't know, there's something that I kind of do like the idea of this not just being a one-on-one boss fight, but this being a thing where there's an audience, and it's like there's the good guy has got to prove himself not just to the boss but to all the people observing, even more so when you consider that these people, if they're at that stage show, will be familiar with Owick and his skills, and it's like Ristar's the next one who's going to come to battle him. Like, I think that's pretty cool. But anyway, now we're in Planet Freon. It's the ice level, it maintains that role from the Mega Drive one, and aesthetically speaking, the first round is quite similar to the first round of the Mega Drive one. But this has a new gimmick brought in that at certain parts of the game, when you go past certain little posts, an explosive thing will be planted on Ristar, and it will stay there until you find a nice little body of water to take a dip in. So if you do get tagged by one of them, which granted you can avoid here like I did for the most part because you can fly over a lot of shit as I'm doing right now, but yeah, if you get tagged by it, you need to race the clock because it will blow up and damage you. I don't think it does kill you, or maybe I'm remembering wrong, but you do need to be on the ball. But now on to the second round of Planet Freon, and you'll notice this looks nothing like either of the Mega Drive acts of Planet Freon. Because the second act of Planet Freon in the Mega Drive one is an underwater one, and it's got that cool looking turquoisey ice aesthetic, which I remember commenting on, saying that's quite a rarity because you usually just have like blues and whites in ice levels. Whereas here, no, for some reason it's changed entirely. Like, there's the odd little snow motif. When you're at the lower points, there's some snow on the ground, but on the whole, it's mostly like machinery. Like, what's coming to mind for me, and this might be a random thing to come to mind given it's not the most well-known Sonic game, but I think of Machine Labyrinth from Sonic Rush Adventure on the DS. That's the machine level that comes to my mind. I guess sparing that, you've also got like maybe it's a different colour Metropolis Zone from Sonic 2, although that's a bit more of a far cry from it. I think this was quite likely a situation where this wasn't intended to be an adaptation of Planet Freon. Maybe they were gonna just make it something original, and then later in development they thought, okay, maybe we should have this mirror the Mega Drive one a little bit more closely. This level in the Japanese version, this planet, is called Planet Timu, T-I-M-U. I don't know whether that's what the Japanese version of the Mega Drive level was called or not. I can't remember much from the Japanese version of that, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it does feel like the kind of thing that maybe the mirroring of the level name was like a last minute change. But then again, because there's so little information published about this version of the game, I am having to go off my own speculation here. And there are people out there who know a fair bit about game design and the processes behind it, the things that go into making a game. I am not one of those people in the slightest. But yeah, all we've got left in this part is the Planet Freon boss. And in the Mega Drive one, we had that boss, I think his name was Itamor, where he would be damaged by you throwing plates of hot food into his mouth, and that would be how you'd attack him. Whereas here we've got this guy called Robo-Rabbit, and there's probably some meaning behind like the filling up time and rabbits and the sand and the rabbits and the fact that it's a robot rabbit. Maybe it's some expression that's not coming to my mind. Maybe it's another Japanese idiom like Itamor was based off. Because sometimes they do get a little bit clever like that in these games. Maybe it's not, maybe I'm looking way too far into it. But as you saw just then, Robo-Rabbit is very easy to take down, so he was no challenge at all really, just gotta attack him when you get the chance when he's open. But yep, ladies and gentlemen, that was Planet Sonata and Planet Freon. Join me next time for the finale where I'll be going into Planet Automaton. I'll see you then.